Hey there, this is your pal Pally, and welcome back to Git Er Raid. If you thought I liked the normal version of this fight, do you have any guess if I'd like the heroic version? Here's a hint. Hell yes! It spoils a Pandaria heroic 10-man time, and we've got presents to open. As with normal mode, you split your raid into 2 5-man teams with a tank and a healer each. We'll talk a little bit about group makeup later, but for now, the general rule will be to try and make the teams as even as possible in terms of DPS, and that includes the healers and tank DPS. Before getting too deep, let's identify the big mechanic change for heroic here. When you kill the contents of a box, an unstable spark gets sent to the other team's side that they have to kill. It immediately starts casting supernova, and if it is allowed to finish, it will likely wipe your team. It's about 500k damage to everyone. Good thing you have about 10 seconds to kill the spark before it goes off. That is really the only change to the encounter, but it obviously comes along with a lot more damage from everything, plus all the health of the adds are increased, of course. Now, one important thing to note is that it doesn't matter the size of the box you open, only 1 spark will be sent for every box's contents you kill. So if you open like 17 small boxes, you send 17 sparks. But if you only open, say, 2 larges, 6 mediums, and a few smalls, you end up sending less. And that's the big part of setting up your strategy ahead of time. You want to minimize the boxes you open and reach the 50 energy per side, just like in normal mode. Remember, each small box is worth 1 energy, medium boxes are worth 3 energy, and large ones are worth 14. There are 2 large boxes, 6 mediums, and quite a few smalls. So let's think about this. Most people like the large adds because it's usually one big target to smack down. You can also combine it with maybe a smaller 2 depending on your comp. If you end up killing both big boxes, that's already 28 energy accounted for, so we need 22 more. If we want to send a minimum amount of sparks over, we could then say we'll take out all of 6 mediums. That's 18 more energy, so we only need to pick up 4 small boxes and we'll be at 50 energy. And with that, we'll send a total of 12 sparks. This is typically the setup that most raid groups go with. There's a balance to be struck here. If you can group up the pulled adds into the middle where the sparks spawn, you can also cleave them down with everything else. Thus, you could maybe open up more small boxes if you want, but realize that is more DPS you need to dump into sparks. It's not too much more, as the sparks are about 800k health in 10-man heroic. So if you decide on your approach to the boxes, the next thing to decide is the order you open them in. This is all on the tanks and healers to decide just how much they can handle at a time. We went through a number of different strategies along the way. Most of them are valid, you just have to be very tight in how quickly you open boxes and pay attention to sparks and boss mechanics. What we settled on was my team would focus on opening the medium and small boxes we wanted early on in the cycle, then we would finish up with a large box. The other team would open their large boxes one after another, and once those were gone, would work on the mediums and smalls. In this manner, we would be sending many sparks to them while they were focused on the big guy. It was easy to stack the big guy in the middle and cleave down sparks. Then when we were working on our big guys, they would be sending us lots of sparks, which we would then cleave down. What we actually ended up doing is modifying this strategy just slightly. We would open up 1 large box first, and then would work on mediums and smalls, and again end on the large. It just helped us get through the large guys since they are a major source of raid damage. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about each add type on each side, but for now, big guys equal big raid damage. Find whatever works for your raid, and maybe it varies between the Mogu versus Mantid side. But just realize one last thing here. Things are tight, so whatever you do, you need to be pulling quickly and minimize any downtime. That is huge. If you have a medium box add at 30% health, that next box better be cracking open milliseconds later. Get on it. So let's talk Mogu side first. As in normal, the dangerous adds are the medium ones, and in heroic, the big guy is really annoying and harmful. The big guy doesn't do anything different from normal mode, but you have to pay attention to the number of stone statues he has out. If he has more than 2 out and he's about to cast his AoE, you are in for a major hit. Even with only 2 out, it's pretty bad. So your focus has to be on killing those statues as fast as possible. Again, try to keep the big guy in the middle so you can cleave any sparks, but it will also help to cleave those statues. Moving on to the mediums. The Anima Golem is certainly an ad whose raid mechanics you can't screw up, or else it spells bad news for you. Gotta handle the matter scramble, and you have to have the tank move him quickly out of that red crap on the ground. You can't afford to have that stuff heal anything. Get the fudge out. And likewise, the Shadow Ritualist isn't too terrible to start, but you can't let him live for a long time or else his torment dot can get out of control. Healers should try to dispel it as much as possible to reset its damage increase, but best to get the Ritualist killed as soon as possible. That's really it to highlight on the Mogu side, so let's turn to the Mantid side. The big guy with the bombs is the same as normal mode, but he's likely to be alive a little longer, so you need to be smarter about placing bombs around the room. It's also pretty smart to use immunities to ignore the bombs until the last second. The only thing about doing that is you need to be careful you don't explode your bombs while standing near someone else. How many times did I deterrence my bombs and yet step on my raid team destroying them instantly? Don't ask. The mediums on Mantid aren't as tricky as the Mogu ones, but be careful of the windstorm from one of them. It hurts a lot more on heroic, of course. You should still try to dispel any buff these guys get, otherwise you might lose your tank. Likewise, the tank killer on this side happens to be one of the small boxes. It's sneaky to notice, but one of the small box ads is called the Warcaller. It can buff itself to do more damage, plus it can apply a stacking armor reduction on the tank. Tanks should be very careful here. Either cool down through it or run away. The ad slows down when this happens and can be kited. Having your tank at 80% armor reduction at some point is a bad thing, so watch for this. Just a few more things to mention before closing out. First, we haven't talked about the green boxes with the monks. Some raid groups find these guys pretty deadly, and thus sort of weave them into the first few groups of boxes they open. We didn't find that at all, and popped both of them at the same time, and burned them down to get their buffs before starting to open other boxes. The only one that causes problems every now and then was the Brewmaster. If he gets you with that keg toss, and then is able to breathe fire on you, it can be a bad day, especially if he manages to get a healer. Just be careful avoiding the keg toss, and if you can't do that, just try to get away from his breath no matter what. Again, we usually killed him off before he even got to this point, but it can happen. While on the subject of the monks, you really should pay close attention to what buffs you get. It's nice to just get the DPS buff or the tank one, but the really super nice one is the healer buff. In case you don't know it from normal mode, you as a healer get a big wave of healing and damage that comes from your front. It's going to happen every 8 seconds and it's really super nice for healing, but more so it's great for all the little ads and sparks. In fact, when my team gets that buff, I had to worry a lot less about the sparks and the stone statue ads, as our disc priest would masterfully point that wave to slaughter those types of things all the time. So healers, step it up and use this one to its full advantage. Your team might need the extra DPS to beat the enrage timers. Beyond that, we really should talk about the transition between the two quadrants. Hopefully your team is finishing off enough ads to get to 50 energy and time to hit the lever, but there are some tricky things to note here. First off, the lever actually takes a few seconds to activate, so be careful you don't use this with only 2 or 3 seconds left on the clock. You risk it blowing you all up anyway, even though you might have clicked on it in time. Secondly, don't immediately jet into the next room with everyone. It's highly likely that one or the other team just barely finished off an ad and then was able to open up the next quadrant. But that last ad dying would send a spark over to the other team. If you forget about that spark, it blows up and you are likely dead. So at least leave one person behind for a few seconds while you start your opening routine in the next quadrant to handle any remaining sparks. It can be super frustrating to get to the end of a quadrant with plenty of time to spare, and then as you go into the next quadrant, you all instantly die for no apparent reason. It's usually because of a forgotten spark. This issue can also be helped a little by good communication between the teams. For example, if one team accidentally opens an extra small box at the end, and then kill its contents as they move to the next quadrant, they should call out to the other team to watch for that spark. If you are beating the timer by quite a few seconds on both sides, it might even be helpful to not click the levers until about 10 seconds left, so that any remaining sparks can spawn and be killed. On initial progression, you may not have that luxury, but if you do, waiting might be a valuable thing to do. I promised we'd talk a little bit about group makeup, so here we are. You should be mindful of what kind of 5-man teams you are putting together. Overall, the best groups will be balanced in terms of DPS, but you may want to be mindful of missing buffs and debuffs between the teams. Using something like MMO Champion's Raid Comp Calculator would help you see what each side has. And don't forget, you might have a healer that is stronger in DPS, so take that into account as well. So when to use Lust is probably the only remaining unanswered question. And I'm sorry to disappoint, but it's going to depend on what your raid teams finds difficult. Given the range of Lust, you can customize each team and use it whenever they need it most without impacting the other team's strategy. For my raid team, we chose to use it on the first big ad spawned on the Mantid side, as that one seemed to hurt us quite a bit. It also helped lessen the amount of bombs strewn about, since we were killed it a little faster. What I'd be careful about is using it in the first quadrant, and then judging that because you are beating the Enraged in that quadrant, you'll be fine in the second quadrant. Maybe it was a raid comp thing, but it felt like both groups took a little longer killing the Mogu side off, so maybe it's more valuable there. My guess would be the statues that spawn from the big guy add to the overall DPS that you need to do, and thus hitting the Enrage is harder there. Whatever you feel like for your group's makeup, go for it. So, in summary, tanks open many presents in a prescribed order, move anima golems out of the red stuff, and keep pulling as quickly as your healer and DPS can stand. Healers, watch for the big AoEs from the big guys, and do your duty if you have the healing buff from the monks. DPS, just cleave, and more cleave, while watching for sparks to kill. The average eye level of our group on this first skill was pretty high, around 570. And here are the healing and DPS charts for reference. Thanks for watching, and please comment, like, and or subscribe to the video if you found it helpful, and have a good one.